So good evening, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thanks for joining us on your Wednesday night or Wednesday late afternoon, wherever you find yourself. My name is Brian Nitzel. I'm the founder of Making Things Right. And I'd imagine most of you showed up tonight to hear my guests, which is as it should be. But so you might not know a whole lot about my organization. So Making Things Right, our mission is to invite curious Christians to rethink the Christian response and responsibility to LGBTQ plus people, especially those who have been harmed by the church. There's an important study that many of us in this work reference that found that 86% of LGBTQ plus people were raised in the church. And of those, over half, 54%, left at the age of consent or around the age of 18. And the number one stated reason, far and away, were negative, harmful personal experiences at church. And I think that is what the Christian conversation should be about. And the beauty of that is we can do that amidst theological differences. This is common ground work. So that's what Making Things Right is about. The plan for and if you want to learn more, makingthingsright.org. All right, the plan for the night. We're going to have a conversation with my two wonderful guests. There will be sort of towards the end of that conversation, a Q&A. And then around 8:45 Eastern time, we'll be wrapping up, which is about an hour and 10 minutes from now. So an hour and 10 minutes from wherever you find yourself, we'll be wrapping up the night. All right. Questions for Q&A. So if you're not super familiar with Zoom, if you go down to the bottom of your screen and hit three little dots, there's probably a chat feature. You can open up that chat window. Feel free to put your questions in there. When all of you registered, we had a field that asks, what do you hope for in this call? And you all put just very wonderful, meaningful comments in there. We reviewed all of those and tried to let that sort of steer our planned conversation tonight. So hopefully what we have planned will serve the majority of you, but please don't be shy about putting your question in the chat if you like. We never get to all of them. But Kelly and the rest of us will be kind of watching that chat, and we'll try to, take a breath somewhere about halfway through and curate some questions out there from you all live. And I think our guests can take hardballs, so just put any questions in there as you like, and we'll find out. All right, and one final thing I want to mention before we get started is respect. I'm confident that 100% of you are here for the best of intentions, but these are, talking about the church and LGBTQ plus matters is kind of spicy conversation. And so sometimes people don't have the best of intentions. So just so you know, we will be watching the chat and the screens to ensure that only productive things are going on. And we will reserve the right to remove folks as needed. And that's just for the protection of all of you that are here for the best of intentions. All right. Okay, so enough for housekeeping. Allow me to sort of set up the conversation for tonight before I introduce our guests. So what is the future of LGBTQ plus inclusion in the church? Or said another way, can we expect that LGBTQ plus people will eventually be considered fully equal participants in the lives of most churches? The realists would say no, or certainly not anytime soon. The optimists, myself included, would say yes, or at least that is what we must hope for and strive towards. Now, to get that vision, we can learn from the past. There was a day, and not that long ago, where civil discourse was common, where thought leaders and churches were leaning into LGBTQ plus matters more productively. That would not be the current state, at least not in the public arena, but pendulums can swing and arcs can bend towards justice. So tonight I've invited two friends who know the past and the present landscape well, and I believe can help us find a better way forward. So let me introduce our guests. Danny Cortez, a very good friend of mine. When I started in this work, you were one of the first people that I reached out to, and you reached back. Co-lead pastor at Long Beach Christian Fellowship in California, and founder of Estuary Space, which provides consulting and pastoral care for churches and individuals that are navigating the nuances of sexuality and the Christian faith. And also Stan Mitchell, a newer friend of mine, but it feels like we're longtime friends by now, founder of Grace Point Church in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm sure you hear some of that story tonight. And these days finds himself to be quite a road warrior, both speaking and supporting leaders behind the scenes as they navigate LGBTQ plus inclusion in their churches. So Danny and Stan, thanks for joining us tonight. It's good to have you.
Good to be here.
Good to be here.
All right, so we're going to dig into really good stuff tonight. But before we kind of get into the meaty topics, maybe just, take a minute, both of you, and just tell us, who you are, where you live, your family, your church, your vocation. Stan, if you want to start, that'd be great.
So I've lived in Nashville, Tennessee for the last 30 years. Grew up in Arkansas, grew up in a Pentecostal family, 5 generations deep, was a young Pentecostal evangelist and then a young Pentecostal pastor. And the Reader's Digest condensed version is I pastored a lot of queer people in those churches and had queer family members and friends. And the incarnational side of those experiences did what I think is at the heart of this for people like Danny and I. We are lovers of Scripture. We're lovers of the church. We didn't throw the church and Scripture away, but we did what the early church did. And the Gentile experience drove them back to the text, reading it again, saying, have we read this most faithfully today? And truly, for me, I suppose the major variable has been the lens of those lives. These were dear Christian people. Their testimony of Christ, the fruit of their life. And I think the third element that really was the most clarifying of the lenses was their suffering. The suffering of people like you, Brian, in our context was what drove me back. And eventually, Danny was a big part of my life. I was doing inclusion about the same time. He was a little ahead of me, and I was following guys like that and just trying to do this faithfully. Grace Point did inclusion 10 years ago.
That's amazing. I love it. We'll dive more into that story in a little bit. That's great. Danny, how about you? Tell them who you are, where you live, what you're up to.
Yeah, so my wife and I live in the suburbs of Los Angeles. We're actually right close to Biola University. I became a Christian through Calvary, kind of Calvary Chapel. I was really involved there, but then my wife was Southern Baptist, so that's how I became Southern Baptist.
Yeah.
I started attending her church, but yeah, I got ordained in that church. Yeah, we have 4 kids, 3 of whom actually came out, identify as LGBTQ. And so,
Wow. 3 out of
yeah,
4. Lucky you.
3 out of 4. And then, like, I have 3 other siblings. Between the 14 kids that we have in our family, 8
Yeah.
out of 14 have come out.
Wow.
And so it's kind of like a mini QCF. Whenever we have
I think
family
you were meant to be in this ministry, Dan, or if not, you had no choice.
It's been good. God has been good. Just really grateful to be here.
That's awesome. All right, well, let's get into the topic at hand, LGBTQ plus inclusion in the church. If you agree with my thesis, I think we can learn from the past, and I think you both have pretty seismic stories around this. So maybe we can start with you, Danny. Would you just walk us, because not everyone knows your story here. Like, what's your journey of LGBTQ plus inclusion, both personally and within your church years ago?
Yeah, so being involved with Calvary Chapel was very evangelical. I was also deeply grounded with Campus Crusade for Christ. I did a lot of missions, and my heart was always to like win the world for Christ. But there was one population that seemed to keep leaving the church, and that was, gay lesbian peoples at the time.
Yeah.
That's the group that kept leaving, and so it got me really curious. I felt like he was like this unreached group almost that was, not only unreached, but actively leaving. And so, yeah, I think it was around 2008 where I started really paying more attention, and I got challenged by one of the lesbian members at my church who got into a relationship with another woman at church and left. And she told me, she asked me, Danny, will you finally study this? And so I
Mm,
went on this like 6 year journey
mhm.
studying the Greek, the Hebrew, the scriptures, the history. And I didn't plan on doing this, but in 2013, there was like this switch that happened. And I came to realize that, oh my goodness, they're not broken.
Mm,
God made them the way they are.
hmm.
They're beautifully and wonderfully made. And that was such an exciting thing for me. But at the same time, I remember I was on the beach when I had that thought cross in my mind in 2013. But shortly after that, I kind of stopped. After that initial excitement, I got scared because the thought
Yeah.
that came into my mind was, oh my God, did I become liberal?
Yes.
And so, yeah, it actually was scary. I didn't know what to do with it. But it was
Mhm,
just about a week later when I started having this conversation with my son because of a song on the radio that was very affirming. And he found out I liked the song. And he asked me why. And I told him, I think I changed my mind. And he looked disturbed. And so I asked him back, why, what do you think about, same sex relationships? And in his
mm.
15-year-old self, he looked at me and he said, Dad, I'm gay.
Mm.
I was just
Wow.
like,
So you
Lord,
didn't know that at all before then?
I didn't know that. I mean, he was only
Wow.
like 9 years old when I first started trying to
Right.
figure this out.
Mm. Mm.
He was actually a little upset that I would have all these books on homosexuality and ancient culture lying around the house, and he would tell me, Dad, put those books away. My friends are coming over.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I think it was. I don't think he would have come out if he hadn't found out that I had become affirming, and so I think he finally, you know, believed that I was a safe person, and that was like two things in a row that happened, like close together in my life where I was trying to figure out how to tell my church, the leaders.
Yeah.
Now that my son had come out to me, I realized that we had to like, it's now our story to tell. It wasn't
Had you
just,
been filling in like confidants within church leaders during your process or even before your son came out to you, or were you kind of keeping that private?
no. So the church knew I was like trying to figure this out. I kept
Hmm.
telling the church that, as I got to know people in the process who had left the church, I initially began to reach out to people who left the church and began asking the question why.
Hmm.
And so it was one of my processes of this, just not trying to understand the scripture, but trying to understand the impact of scripture on
Yeah.
people. And so, yeah, the elders knew. And I remember like multiple times in my sermons, I would tell the church, we need to love LGBTQ people better. Even though I was still non-affirming at the time, I knew there was something wrong in the way we were caring for LGBTQ people. And so the church was very aware that I was visiting West Hollywood.
Hmm.
I was, going to the AIDS clinics there. I was trying to build relationships. And, when you get to know LGBTQ people and their suffering and their stories, it changes you. And you begin to see how much, your theology has negatively impacted and caused depression.
Yeah.
And so in 2014, I told my elders, and immediately in the Southern Baptist Church, they moved to fire me. But the congregation, asked, "Hey, we're a congregational church. We need to take this to vote." And so, for about 6 months, we went through a discernment process. The church went through a split. I officiated a gay wedding like about a month after, and then the Southern Baptist Convention expelled our church from the denomination.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, in short, that's kind of what happened. It was, yeah. And so, this was right before marriage equality passing in 2015.
You're right, right, right.
Um, because, we were the first Southern Baptist church that was dismissed on three levels. There's the national convention, state convention, and, the local city. And all three Southern Baptist levels voted unanimously to dismiss our church.
But wasn't part of your story that your church made a vote for you to stay and for you all to sort of pivot your thinking as a body, and that is what was the catalyst for getting booted from Southern Baptist, right?
Yeah, there was two things. One is that the church voted to become what we called Third Way.
Third
And
way,
Ken
right?
Wilson came out with the book that same year. And so we
Yeah.
started talking, Ken and I. And we decided as a church in this period of discernment, like the book literally came out in our period of discernment.
What was the name of that book again?
It was Letter to My Congregation.
Letter to My Congregation. Ken
Yeah.
Wilson. Yep, that's right.
So yeah, and so the church, we began to have conversations. What does a third way church look like?
Hmm.
Because at the time in my Southern Baptist church, there were only two affirming people in the church. It was me and this other person in church, besides my son. And so, for a church like ours, I mean, if we were going to become an affirming church, everyone would have left. And so I think for our church, it was necessary to take that step
Yeah.
to be in process. And for us, the third way meant that, I mean, there was a lot of different things related to that, but one of the things it meant was that we will allow our pastors to have to live out their own theology. And so if our pastor believes that God blesses same-sex relationships, then we'll allow him to officiate gay weddings. And so that's kind of what happened. So I was given permission to officiate, even though the vast majority of the Southern Baptist congregation at the time was very non-affirming.
Hmm.
So that's kind of a testament to to them like being willing to like listen and be in process.
Yeah. That's amazing. What about the church today? I mean, I know you're at a new church now, but how long did you stay with your church? How did that church evolve? Were there some big losses? Were there some gains? Just curious what happened after that decision was made and you left the or left the denomination.
Yeah, so one of the big things that happened actually was that the biggest change that happened after we were dismissed from the denomination was that we moved very quickly to ordain a woman pastor.
Hmm.
Southern Baptist churches were not allowed to have women pastors, and so that was like a big move for us. There was already a woman who was acting pastorally. I mean, she pretty much was a pastor, just without the title.
Hmm.
And so that was one of the beautiful things. And what's interesting is when I was brought to Nashville before the Southern Baptist executive directors. I was brought there. Pretty much it was a trial. There was 83 directors, and I began meeting with like presidents of seminaries. And one of the big name presidents actually said to me, Danny, the big reason why I am so opposed to same-sex marriage is because if we don't draw the line here, then we have to begin allowing women to be pastors in our churches.
Hmm.
And I thought that was really fascinating,
Hmm.
how he connected the two, that, the
Hmm.
line, the ultimate line wasn't even about LGBTQ inclusion in the church. It was about making sure the patriarchy remained strong within the denomination.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty fascinating. And so yeah, I think yeah, that was such a big shift. And then there were so much other shifts. We began to realize that it wasn't just about LGBTQ inclusion, but there were so much intersections, regarding race, regarding trans, non-binary, gender expansive identities, regarding classism and ableism, and so many other things that our church began to like rethink, have a broader picture of what salvation actually looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because we were so evangelistic. We didn't like pay attention to like what it meant to like care for the poor or to set the prisoners free and things like that.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I think the church just developed organically as we started having more LGBTQ people in the church. It helped us look, through the eyes of justice and mercy so much more.
That's what I was going to ask you. So after you made that decision, denomination changed. I'm assuming people left, But was there a new influx of new either queer people or just folks that were more interested in how you were doing church?
Oh yeah, definitely. That was the big thing that happened was that so much LGBTQ people found out about our church because at the time we made national headlines. Yeah, because the Southern Baptist Church is the largest Protestant denomination in the US, and
Hmm,
they were the ones really pushing against marriage equality.
sure.
So for a church like ours to actually kind of, break the break rank, it created kind of a scandal. And as a result, I began to get so many phone calls from so many different people. And people started coming to our church. There were, people literally like staying outside of our door. And I'm like looking, wondering, are they going to come in? And so I go out and they're like, is it safe to come inside? And there's one guy I remember saying, it's been 10 years since I've been in a church. Am I
Oh,
allowed to come in? And I remember shortly after we asked him to serve communion, and he was just blown away. He was like,
hmm,
I, I was prevented from taking communion, from being part of the church, and now you're asking me to serve communion.
hmm,
And I remember the first time he served communion, there was just this like shaking, of his hands, holding the elements and just seeing like just the beauty of that moment of
hmm,
how yeah, so many people are trying to hold on to faith, and for them now to be like a central part of the church, it was just beautiful. I mean, there's so much now because I'm close to Biola University. We had so many Biola students who hadn't even come out yet in their universities attending our church.
hmm.
We had a trans man who who was a new graduate. He just came out, and he was disowned by his parents. They took away his car and pretty much, yeah, just left alone. And so we took him into our house. He lived with us for 8 months.
Hmm.
And at the time I wasn't studying about I was my primary study was around same-sex relationships. And now I was like here living with a trans person and
Hmm.
and learning in real time through real conversations,
Yeah,
just the impact of the church. So yeah.
that's quite a foundation. That's a great story. Thanks.
Yeah.
Let's hear from you, Stan. What's your foundation when it comes to this stuff, both personally and within your pastoral vocation?
Well, I think personally, the issue of inclusion and exclusion has always been a very troubling part of my Christianity.
Hmm,
And that's heightened because I grew up in a denomination that was a restorationist denomination that believed we were founded somewhere around 1915. Our cardinal, one of our imperative doctrines was that the church had been dormant for 18 centuries. And so our version of Pentecostalism even referred to itself as apostolic because we were restoring the apostolic doctrine. So there was always some conjecture that maybe somewhere in those 18th centuries, someone had found some semblance of the truth we had. So it was a lonely world. My dad was the 12th of 15 kids, and those 15, my aunts and uncles, and the 46 of us first cousins, and our great aunts and uncles,
you guys have
really
big families. Holy
big
cow.
family. Yeah, yeah. People always, I joke and say, people ask if we were Roman Catholic or Mormon, and I say no, we were Northeast Arkansas. So but our family, this huge family, we didn't divide up religiously or even denominationally. We divided up Pentecostally.
Hmm,
Like there were Church of God, Assembly of God, and then the Oneness Pentecostals, and it divided up pretty evenly. And I just remember as a child, I was always deeply troubled by the fact that those of us in my parents' camp did not believe that the other family members were even saved.
hmm.
So that was very troubling for me. I didn't even get out to. This sounds like I'm joking, but it's really true. I didn't even get out to Danny and the Southern Baptist or Billy Graham, and I certainly didn't get out to, the Methodist and the Lutherans. and absolutely didn't get out to Mother Teresa and Thomas Merton, much less other religions. I just was a 10, 11, 12-year-old, very sincere kid that was troubled about Uncle Bud and Aunt Charlotte and Uncle Junior and, my family members. And so, long story short, that issue, because there's always within Christianity, we can't get around the fact that there is this assumption, this underlying reality that God has a people, that God has a family, and some are in it and some aren't.
Hmm.
And so that so troubled me that I stretched as far as I could, which was referred to in our exclusivistic group as heresy or backsliding. I stretched as far as I could and included other Pentecostal groups.
Hmm.
And the people that I stretched beyond called it heresy. The Assembly of God and Church of God, Foursquare, Pentecostal Holiness, they called it growth. And then I lived there, and you can see what happens. It's called the slippery slope.
Mm-hmm.
That same muscle spiritually, I then used for other evangelicals, non-tongue speaking evangelicals like Nazarenes, Church of Christ, Southern Baptists. And I stretched as far as I could, wrestling with, was this the devil convincing me of a lie? Was this the searing of my conscience? Or was it spiritual growth? Well, it depended on who you asked. The people that I
Yeah.
stretched beyond called it heresy. The people I stretched to called it growth. That repeated 5 or 6 times until I finally got all the way out to Henry Nouwen and Mother Teresa and Pope John Paul and Thomas Merton and Catholic Christians like Richard Rohr. And I finally left the evangelical world just on those grounds. And we started Grace Point in 2003, and Grace Point started the novel thing that we were doing for us is we started as an interdenominational church
Hmm.
as opposed to a non-denominational. And we took Robert Weber's idea of inclusive worship. Weber was an incredible scholar of all things worship and the Christian tradition, and we really were careful to take from the liturgical and from the evangelical and then from the more charismatic Pentecostal. We even said, I think Weber was the one that said the church has furniture. And for the liturgical, it's the Eucharist table or the communion table. For the evangelical, it's the pulpit and teaching. For the Pentecostal, it's the altar. And those pieces of furniture, we need them all. And so we started Grace Point to be that kind of an interdenominational place. And we teased that we ran the aisles and tripped over our rosary beads. And and that kind of open-heartedness was rooted in me feeling like some of God's children had an antipathy and a lack of recognition for their siblings, and I felt like that broke the father heart of God. And so Grace Point was founded on this idea of who's in and who's out. And I just thought continually, all the way back to when I was the 10-year-old boy and one of my uncles passed away who was Church of God, I just always felt the arc of God's mercy was going to cut a wider swath. And so that was Grace Point. And then the Buckle of the Bible Belt, that kind of church that's reading Tony Campolo and Philip Yancey, some of the more aggressive evangelicals. We were a bit of a gadfly, and we grew from a handful of people to a few thousand, and it was a lovely place. And as you might imagine, between 2003 and 2012, we grew, we built a campus, and we were just known as the deconstruction zone. People who were reading Campolo and Yancey then started reading McLaren and Bell, because again, the slippery slope, and the question begs, is the slippery slope, a path to hell, or is it greased by grace and lands you in the lap of God? Well, it depends on who you ask, and
Right.
that kind of church, Brian, attracted a lot of queer people.
Yeah.
And it attracted a lot of queer people because between 2003 and 2012 in Nashville, the Buckle of the Bible Belt, that kind of inclusion talk, we weren't talking about them, but they were vicariously feeling that the impact could eventually hit them. And if it
Yeah.
didn't hit them, they could at least appreciate that we had that spirit. And then
Yep.
Obergefell came along. And that, long story short, if you pastor in Nashville, you're going to have a few country stars in your church if you have a church of any size. And one of our country stars, when Obergefell hit, was in the United Kingdom, I think London.
Oh,
And
that interview. Yes, yes.
she was asked what she thought about
Okay.
same
Yeah.
sex marriage, and she said she believed that love was love. And you remember the Dixie Chicks were in the United Kingdom when they made a statement about President Bush that was quite negative, and they kind of lost their country music career because that's a very conservative milieu. And I think the BBC reporter was pressing Kerry on that, and so he pressed in even further and said, I know you are a Christian, and that doesn't reconcile with your Christian faith. And Carrie, having appreciated the 9 years of our church and kind of the inclusive spirit, though we had never really broached that subject, she said, "Well, I believe that our church is gay friendly." That was her language, and she may have mentioned that she believed her pastor would do a wedding. By the time that got back across the Atlantic,
You were in
by the time
trouble.
we got back across the Atlantic, we had the Wall Street Journal and Time. Like Danny was saying, it's amazing how ballyhooed all that was, how strange it seemed back then. But they were coming, and Westboro Baptist came that weekend to picket us. I knew at that point, Brian, I had to search my heart. I thought, I have loved the project that Grace Point has been. It's been a place where Orthodox, Episcopals and Catholics and Baptists and Pentecostals could come together and appreciate and learn from one another. Kind of our base foundation really was Brian McLaren's book, Generous Orthodoxy. Instead of a tight orthodoxy, kind of Barbara Brown Taylor's idea of holy envy. Let's learn from one another. Maybe there's something in liturgy. Maybe there's something in this emotive spirit move, that Pentecostals emphasize. And anyway, I loved all of that, but I knew in my gut that I was inclusive. And if you would have walked up to me at any point in those first 9 years and says, how does Grace Point feel about same gender marriage or substitutionary penal atonement? I would have said, I don't know, you'll have to ask them. Because we weren't one of those churches that had 10 doctrinal statements. We were a deconstruction zone for people that was a safe place. And that filled up with queer people. But I was a pastor at heart, always have been. It's the thing I love most about ministry is hospitals and funerals and pastoral care. And I knew when our queer people came and asked me to marry them that I couldn't say no. I didn't know how I could say yes. I didn't know what that would mean to our congregation. I just know personally that I couldn't. And so instead of imposing that on the congregation, and doing that founder syndrome thing of overextending myself, I asked the elders and the congregation if we could at least have a couple of year period of discernment. And we were reading Ken Wilson and following what Danny and them were doing, and we were just muddling our way through. And then in the end of 2014, after 2 years of that, I married Michael and Josh, the first wedding. Michael had been our minister of music when we started Grace Point.
Huh.
Grace Point's spirit so impact. He grew up in the UPC with me. We were dear friends. He was my first minister of music. The spirit of Grace Point so impacted him as a closeted queer person. He came out as being gay. He was in a mixed orientation marriage. The marriage dissolved. He had 2 children. It was really hard. And I remember saying to him then, let's go ahead and face this as a congregation. That was probably 05. And he said he wasn't ready. He didn't feel like the congregation was ready. He left. Now here I am 9 years later, and I find out that he and Josh are getting married. They invited me to the wedding, but they didn't ask me to do it because they didn't want to impose that on me while Grace Point was still in the fray.
Yeah.
But I ended up doing that wedding in January of 2015. We came out as fully inclusive, and that was the thumbnail sketch of it.
And it makes me think of something too that you said to me once, or and I could even ask both of you this question. So, but something you had said to me, Stan, you said back then, because there were so many things like I think I've talked to you both about this, where I've just been sort of connecting the dots in my research of like before 2015. Like there just seemed like, with the emergent church movement and McLaren and Rob Bell and evangelicals were starting to, lean in on, or things of thinking about things a little bit differently. Andrew Marin,
Mhm.
2009, kind of the
Right.
first time that a evangelical friendly invitation to elevate the conversation with LGBTQ plus people was well received. In 2014, all these books, Ken Wilson's book, David Gushie's book, Matthew Vine's book, Justin Lee's book, and then all of a sudden, gay marriage hit. I mean, maybe that was a line in the sand. I don't know. But like back then, you said you had felt like the dam was going to burst. But 10 years later, it's still a trickle because this conversation is so hard. Can you sort of speak to that back then and why both of you, like, because it seemed like there was a really readiness for change here, and here we are 11 years later, and like you said, it's sort of a trickle.
Danny, do you wanna take
Yeah,
that first?
please.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly thought that there's going to be a lot of change, even with the, president on board with everything, and things started looking really good. But I think, when the evangelicalism is such a strong political force,
Yeah,
that they knew how to bring the group together, regroup. There was a lot of shrewdness actually. Um, and I do think that there has been a lot of movement since 2015. I know more affirming churches than ever before.
Hmm.
And so there are, and back then it was Q Christian Fellowship and the Reformation Project that was, the main places where LGBTQ evangelical Christians would attend.
Hmm.
Now, there are so many organizations like, your organization that's doing
Hmm.
great work. And so there are a lot of positives, but at the same time, I think it just shows us that, there's a lot of work still to be done. The good thing is that there are more books than ever before. Back then, like you said, there was, Marin and Justin Lee, um, there weren't a lot of books directed at evangelicals back then. And so I had to do a lot of work outside of like my tradition to find anything.
To find resources, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the good thing was that there were people, right? There were organizations, especially with UCC, Association of Welcoming and Affirming Baptists. Presbyterian USA, was doing this in the 1990s.
Mm.
And so, but again, they were outside of my like tradition. And so it took me a while to find resources, but now we have them more than ever before. I also think that more and more people are becoming like affirming, whether from a Christian place or, you know, even a secular place.
Hmm.
It's just that the non-affirming population is so vocal
Mm.
and so well organized that they're making, they're doing things strategically that's making it difficult, especially in the political realm,
Mm.
to trying even to overturn gay marriage.
Mm.
But I do think that population is shrinking, especially, churches are still in decline. Even conservative churches, especially, are in decline. But I do think that there is good, and so it's kind of a both and for me.
Yeah. I do love that you reminded us that there is hope and, or meaning even an expansion of resources and thought process and stuff like that. How about you, Stan? Why do you think it's still a trickle?
I I am not bent toward being Pollyannic, but I'm very hopeful. I
Mm.
feel like it would be terribly narcissistic and egocentric to have made my own journey and say, I've just given up. People aren't changing. Well, I did. and you did, and Danny did. I think lots have. I also think one day with the Lord's as 1,000 years. And as much as I want this to go more swiftly than it has gone, um, nothing about our tradition says that our reformations, our evolution, our growth, our maturity, whatever you want to call it, happens swiftly. I mean, inclusion is not a new issue for Christianity. Christianity, I love the fact that the book of Acts is not just a history of these mighty outpourings of the Spirit, but the fulcrum story is a church struggling in the midst of those mighty moves of the Spirit with inclusion and exclusion.
Hmm.
I mean, right out of the chute, we were at the same time filled with the Spirit and wrong about Gentiles. And it wasn't an easy fix. And it caused a lot of heartache and heartburn and struggle in the early church. So we don't have to wait to the 18th and 19th century to say, well, the church was wrong about slavery or women. No, no, no. We started, but I don't even despair about that because I don't think that's a negative story. We were human and we were frail, and we have this treasure in earthen vessels. But we not only had the capacity to get things wrong, which, of course, we had the capacity to be confronted and to be corrected. So I have great hope. I do believe the church is inclusive in lots of ways. I believe it needs to be more inclusive. I believe it's growing. If you ask me, are you satisfied with the pace at which it's growing? Absolutely not. Any more than I'm satisfied with the pace at which I've grown in
Yeah.
my life. So the hard thing is I don't want to in any way be glib and say I think everything's going fine. It's not. Children are dying. I just left a documentary done by a friend of mine around this issue and listened to Christian leaders talk about the loss of their teenage child who was intersex. So I am not leaning back and saying it's going fine. It's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. It's evolution. It's going to take a while. We just got to be patient. I don't want to be patient, but I also at the same time don't want to lose my peace. I don't think that God is lying on a couch somewhere taking Xanax with an ice pack on his head, thinking the thing's falling apart. I do believe that he will build his church. And as frail as it is and as slow as it's going, I'm deeply encouraged. I get to in our movement now kind of be a de facto district superintendent who just goes amongst the churches, and I'm seeing many, many churches change and move toward this. And the last thing I want to say is I think I think human spirituality is always going to be a part of the human frame. I think religion is going to be a part of spirituality. I think Christianity has a massive role in that. And I deeply am moved by the person of Jesus. And I want to say this: I love the church. I am a sentimentalist. I'm nostalgic. I love the church on so many levels. But our leader, the one who has inspired our entire movement, did not do well with institution, nor did institution do well with him. And I think there are a lot of Christ followers who are moving toward inclusion, but they are not doing that with the church.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yes.
I think we've got to be careful. As much as I am a lover of the church, I don't think our final metric and measurement is going to be on Sunday morning or institutional Christianity. It certainly wasn't for Jesus. Why would we think it would be different for us?
That's a great point. Yep. I love that. What about the work you're doing today? Reminder everybody, if you have any questions that you wanna fire at us, the chat is available to you. We'll keep going, but just to remind you that. Tell. I know that both of you. I mean, Danny, you do a variety of things behind the scenes, but do you care to share a little bit about some of the work you're doing behind the scenes with churches that are either challenging or hopeful as they navigate LGBTQ plus matters in their church? Danny, if you want to start.
Sure. Yeah, I started a nonprofit called Estuary Space, just providing consultation, and that led me to work in Africa.
That's
So
right.
we actually launched a new nonprofit called Bridges in Africa, where we are, just trying to help local LGBTQ ministries. Africa is a place that is largely forgotten in the West, except by missionaries. For some reason, missionaries are going over there and like exporting a lot of toxic, oppressive, harmful theology to LGBTQ people.
Hmm.
And as I meet with leaders in Africa, it's clear that there's a lot of missionary movement that is doing this kind of work over there that's
Hmm.
making it harder for the existence of LGBTQ people.
Hmm.
And so we thought to launch this nonprofit to come alongside these amazing, beautiful leaders who were trying to stand up and speak into it and create space for LGBTQ Christians, especially.
Hmm.
A lot of, not most, but yeah, I mean, most of the African countries are very non-affirming, except like South Africa. Yeah, and even then, there's a lot of oppression. But there's a lot of places in Africa where it's illegal, where you actually go to jail. Not only you will go to jail if you come out, but if your family supports you, you can go to jail.
Hmm.
And so, so one of the things I'm trying to do is elevate and create platforms for African LGBTQ people to speak and to, and just to say we're here.
Hmm.
And so yeah, that's one of the things that we're hoping to see happen. But yeah, like Stan, I continue to do work here in the US. Um, and it's amazing. I did a video. I preached a sermon at my Southern Baptist Church before the split, called Why I Changed My Mind on Homosexuality. Posted it on YouTube. That was in 2014. And to this day, I get weekly messages
Mhm.
about the message still,
Hmm.
reaching out, asking for counsel, for questions. And so for whatever reason, God is still using that video
Yeah.
and
Just like
teaching.
what Stan said, 10 years is like a nanosecond to God, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. That's great.
And just more recently, I started pastoring at Long Beach Christian Fellowship.
Yeah.
I came into the church, and it officially just became a third way church. And so that's why they brought me in. It was a church that I was doing consultation work with. But then as we paid attention to LGBTQ people in the church, it became clear that third way just wasn't working.
Hmm.
Third way is like a transition period, a meaningful transitionary period. But for a lot of LGBTQ people in the church, it's very difficult to exist in the third way space
Yeah.
because it still allows for oppressive teaching.
Like still
And
second
so,
class citizens, right?
yeah, still
Yeah.
second class. And so we guided the church to become fully affirming in 2023. And so I again, was part of a church where there was a lot of like difficult conversations,
Yeah. Yeah.
and several people again left. And so it's part of, and so yeah, I think, churches even, that became third way inclusive, there's still a lot of growing. And even now as a church, we're still trying to figure out what it
Hmm.
means to be safe for LGBTQ people. Because if you have the majority of the leadership who are straight and cisgender, we are just still naturally
Yes.
align our sermons, align the way we do church to straight cis people.
Yep.
So how do we allow the church to, how do we pay attention and listen more so that the church can continue to grow?
I love that. That's really good. Kelly, I see a bunch of good questions dropping in the chat. Is there any that stand out to you?
Yeah, both of you, I think, know that I particularly love quotes of yours and I cling to them a lot as inspiration. So, Stan, I'm going to point to you right now, and Danny, I'm going to come to you in a little bit. But, Stan, I think that I love your quote that if we claim to be allies and we're not getting hit by the stones being thrown at the LGBTQ plus community, we're just not standing close enough. So this question comes in from Carol, and it says, in the intense anti-trans political atmosphere of today, what can progressive, inclusive, affirming churches and Christ followers do to be strong allies and resist the oppression?
What can churches do to be strong allies? I mean, obviously, and the one who asked that question, Carol, was one of our elders at Grace Point that led us through the process. She lives in California now and is a part of the church out there that Danny's a part of, but she was one of the 3 or 4 elders that really guided us through.
Hmm.
And she knows the answer to that question probably better than I do. But I think we
And I'd
have
say
to,
churches and individuals, maybe
Right,
if
and
you
and
could
individual.
expand your thoughts there,
yeah,
Stan.
right now we have to be louder than we've ever been. And I think there is a tendency right now for the turtle head to go back in the shell because there is a bit more hostility. I find myself even being tested on that, frankly. The climate is really much more difficult right now. I think in 2008 to 2016, and then from 2020 to 2024, we overestimated our influence.
Hmm.
I think we won 50.1 to 49.9 and immediately felt like it was 80-20, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
It just wasn't. And so I think the real issue right now, I don't think the numbers have changed that drastically. Our elections and our nation can swing on that 50.1 to 49.9. And I talk to the folk who are on the other side of the fence because they're my family members. They tell me right now that turnabout is fair play because this is the same level of despair and silencing that they felt from us.
From their
And
particular views. Yep.
yeah, and so I think right now to say the same things that I was saying 2 years ago requires more courage for me. I'm saying that personally, not abstractly. To make the same post that I was making 2 years ago, I swallow a little bit harder right now than I
Hmm.
did. And I don't know any way around the fact that I keep reminding myself that for much of Western Christianity, this is the first and maybe last chance any of us will ever have to do anything that even remotely approximates taking up our cross and following Christ. Growing up in the South, growing up in Christianity, there was no cost for me. As a matter of fact, there was payoff for me. So for a lot of us, this is the only chance we may ever have to do something that even comes near what Paul said. We are filling up in our body the sufferings of Jesus, which were
Hmm.
incomplete. And I just watching that documentary, I'm in New York City right now, and I just watched that documentary done by a friend of mine that really in the most heartbreaking and articulate and tasteful way logged the life of this child named Levi that ended up not making it. And I just want to say the only parenthetical, I think it's an important parenthetical that should be added to that quote that people have picked up on of mine. If you say you're an ally to a group of people and you're not getting hit by the stones thrown at them, you're not standing close enough. My addendum to it is very important. I don't get those stones directly. I get them by deflection. I get them after my queer brothers and sisters have absorbed the majority of the blow, and then by deflection, they hit me. I am never, as a cishet white person with many advantages, I'm never taking the direct blow that 11-year-old intersex child
Hmm.
took being raised by a pastor. So I want to be careful.
Yeah.
My crucifixions are not theirs. And I just think we need more courage. And we're really being tested right now on that integrity level.
Yeah. How about you, Danny? How do you, when you think about ways that we can be effective allies and advocates, either for LGBTQ or plus transgender in today's environment, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think yeah, I'm reminded of a good friend of mine, Susan Shoplin. She used to be on the board of QCF. She's a parent also of a gay child, and she said to me once, as straight cis people, we will always be a step behind on understanding what it means to be LGBTQ and
Mm.
Christian. Like Stan said, we'll never like fully get it. As allies, that there's a level of humility that we have to carry. that we're always learning. And even this conversation we have, Stan and I with you, Brian and Kelly, I see this more as a conversation of people who are in the process of repenting.
Yeah.
We're repenting from the years of harm that we've done in our churches.
Yep.
We're repenting from, the harm that, harmful theologies we've taught. And so this is us sharing, how we are recovering, we are recovering persecutors.
Yep.
And so I think, as allies, it's always good to have the posture of, we're it's not something, especially we pat ourselves on the back on that, here we are doing good work, but no, this is us trying to save ourselves. This is
Yes.
us trying to save ourselves from being the harmful people that, we were once. And that's why I love, when Paul talks about his conversion experience. I think his salvation started in Acts when he stopped harming the church.
Yeah.
Our salvation begins when we stop doing harm.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of this process for me. It wasn't just that LGBTQ people found a safe place, but more so that we, as a church, finally stopped actively oppressing LGBTQ people. And that's, I think, that's what we fight for. But
Yeah.
also, I think it's, we don't always try to have to hit the home run. I think, in this day and age, I think there's some people that could hit the home run. There's the Otanis out there that are in the front lines doing the political work. And just, I have friends, like Linda Robertson, who was before the Supreme Court the past few days, trying to speak up about the problems of conversion therapy.
Yeah.
But most of us, it's going to be the everyday embodiment of what Jesus looks like.
Yeah.
And that's why it's not so much about having all these arguments, to try to win, people towards an affirming theology. And as everyone's trying to pursue truth, there was this question that Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth? I remember when I was a seminary student, I was thinking, Jesus, here was the time you can actually finally give the definitive answer, the truth. And Jesus says nothing. And I was wondering, Jesus, why didn't you say anything? And as I reflected on it, it dawned on me that if Jesus gave an answer, a verbal answer, truth would have been defined as a theological statement. But by being silent, Jesus said, you're looking at truth. I am the embodiment of truth. Truth isn't about verbal arguments. It's not about quoting scripture. It's about revealing who God is.
Yeah.
And that's, my transformation. It stands transformation. The reason why we were changed in this was because of LGBTQ friends.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
people who embodied what suffering looked like, what our teachings were doing to people.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think we have to continue embodying, what Christ looks like.
Hmm.
And so, yes, to all the political work, but also we have to do the little things, bunting, when we need to bunt. We need to, look at pitches when they're bad and just know that all these little things. I'm talking a lot of baseball because the Dodgers are about to come up in 45 minutes. And I hope we beat the Phillies. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think,
Well, and that's so
sometimes
encouraging too, because sometimes you think that you just have to do all these big things, but a lot of it is just the little things like these types of conversations and what do we want to do with that? And
I would love to add, because my answer was a bit ethereal, Brian, or not ethereal, but on a large level. Practically,
yeah.
as a cis het white person, I'm not forfeiting some of those advantages. I'm deferring them. Like right now,
Yeah, yeah.
I am fronting trans voices as much as I can. I just got a United Methodist Church in Pleasanton, California, had asked me to come a couple of months ago. They were going to have a conversation about the trans community and the trans issue. And I said, why in the world would you have me? And Paula Stone
Right.
Williams went.
Yeah.
I just spent this last week in Mesa, Arizona, and I met with Michael Soto, another exceptional trans leader. I am I am taking I'm taking Paula and Michael, just to tell you practically, I'm taking Paula and Michael to as many places as I can right now. I'm going with them. Instead of me showing up and speaking, I'm deferring the speaking opportunity to them because people need to be hearing from them. So I'm fronting, not just on social media, but in weekend services, I'm fronting trans voices like Michael and Paula's as much as I possibly can. And
Yeah.
I think it's important for us, to Danny's point, the trans community, the LGBTQ community, it didn't need us to do something wonderful. It needed us to stop doing something awful. And I think the stewardship of some of the unseemly privileges that I've gotten,
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
best stewardship is to defer them to voices like yours and to step further away from the microphone and be more of a support. So that's one of the things I'm doing practically.
That's so good. Thank you. Thank you. Kelly, do you got another one for us?
I sort of have a personal, I kind of want to piggyback on what you both were talking about, because for me, I've personally been convicted, like you said, both said, to speak up more, to speak more loudly, because I believe that to be silent is to be complicit, particularly in these days. But there's a cost to that. And, we're all working toward unity. And I don't want to say, I'm not trying to, none of us want to come across as a martyr, but there is a cost. And so I wonder, how you encourage people, both of you, to hold two truths, like that you do have this deep conviction and you do need to speak out, but there's this tension in the middle. Particularly, Danny, going back to a quote, back at QCF, you talked about when you had an issue with some of your former congregants they took an issue with you, and you so beautifully said, and this sticks with me and it'll stick with me for the rest of my life: if you can't love me as your friend, can you love me as your enemy? That encourages me every single day, not just for people in this space, but for the people against us. So if you both can, I guess maybe start with Danny, but speak to how, we do love our enemies and we do need to speak out, and how we can hold this and the tension at the same time.
Which is perfect because like one of our top questions is like, how do we have these better dialogues with those that we disagree, and like how do we lean in even with folks that we see causing harm, for example?
Yeah, I shared this story at my church recently, where there was this very political. I'm not sure if I could name the get too detailed in this, but there was a very political store at in Seal Beach that was very like anti everything I stood for. And this was my day off. I was trying to have a nice day at the beach, and there happened to be this new store that popped up, and I was like, I had seen it before, and I remember always like trying to walk away from it because it was so disturbing. But for some reason, on this one particular day off, I go to the beach often, and so on this particular day off, I decided to walk into the store. And sure enough, there were so much racist, homophobic, transphobic things that were there. And it just grieved me. I was like, just thinking, there's just so much problematic things here. But as a matter of practice, I remember before I started walking out, I looked over at the lady that was at the counter, who was working the register. Before I walked out, I made it a point to walk towards her. And I just looked at her, and I just greeted her. And I said, I hope you have a great day. Um, that was me trying to remind myself that beneath everything is still a person. Um, beneath all the political arguments, all the paraphernalia, all the stuff that's in the store, the person at that store is still a person created in the image of God. I still have to see the humanity in people. And so to the quote, Kelly said, the context of that quote was that, it was dear friends who left the church. And I had wrote so many letters to people who left the church asking, you know what, it's okay if you don't attend the church anymore, but can we still be friends? And this one particular couple pretty much said, we don't understand how we can be friends anymore. You're basically flying around the country, and we believe Satan is using you to destroy the nation. And I was like, I realized that in their mind, our friendship was just, there was no more. And it was in that conversation, I saw that they were no longer addressing me as pastor, because they always called me Pastor Danny. And so I said, hey, before you leave, can I ask you something? I understand if you no longer see me as a pastor and call me a pastor. I can understand if you no longer see me as a friend and love me as a friend. But will you be willing to love me as your enemy? And I don't know why I said that, but I knew that there was something in me that was like feeling compelled. And I even as I say this, I don't think this is something I would like. It's not prescriptive, right? I'm not trying to tell everybody to make friends with your enemies. But in my situation, I think God was calling me to like build bridges to people that I deeply cared about. And they were like puzzled. They were like, we don't know. Like, what does that even mean? And I basically said, I want to know that if you're in the hospital, that there is nothing that prevents me from bringing you food and from saying a prayer. And I want you to know that if I'm in the hospital, that there would be no hesitation on your part. And so can we do this? Can we love each other in this way? And they agreed to. And that for me has been pivotal in trying to figure out how do we keep loving people and care for people, especially if they're in need. I think God calls us to like love in spite of our differences.
It's so good, Danny. We've only got 5 minutes left, so how shall we finish? Do you have a good question, Kelly, or Stan? Do you have something like on your heart?
I do.
Good.
Danny's wisdom of saying you've got to be so careful in these spaces because there's so much nuance and there's so much complexity in all of this to not be prescriptive. But from an anecdotal testimonial place, I just want to say, and we would need an entire episode or 14 to tease this out. I feel like I work at the intersection of two wounds. I mean, talking about what I do during the week, I do 10 to 12 intensives a month with families from conservative traditional backgrounds trying to reconcile the gender and sexuality of their loved one with their faith. And it is a terrible caricature and a wrong assumption to think that you're dealing with a wounded person and their hateful perpetrators. I don't, when I say I work at the intersection of two wounds, the obvious one is the wound of queer people at the hands of the church's bad theology, from my perspective. But the people holding that bad theology,
yes,
I have great empathy for them because I remember being in their place.
yes.
And I just want to say to caricature that what needs to happen here is they just need to love better. Brian, I loved queer people when I thought it was sin. I love queer people now that I don't believe it's sin. My heart toward queer people hasn't changed. My mind about scripture and God has changed. And do I believe there are hateful people with malevolent motives that hurt queer people? Absolutely. But the vast majority of people in the Christian church, there is a 2,000-year tradition here of Christianity that has long struggled with issues like this. And I do not expect you, although you do it and you have mentored me in the spirit of this, I don't expect queer people to subject themselves to abuse continually. But most of my queer Christian friends do at some point develop equanimity and compassion for the perpetrators because they themselves perpetrated that judgment on because they believed that theology.
Yes.
And so I just think there's room for compassion. And I just noticed that the really great sages, the grayer their hair got, they did not lose their ardor and their fire in defending the victim. But all of them, from Socrates to Jesus to Solzhenitsyn to Mandela, developed more and more compassion for the perpetrator. They look down from crosses and they say crazy things like, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And that is not a cliche. It's not tongue in cheek.
Hmm.
So I just think there's room for compassion. There is a 2,000-year tradition, and it is hard. I didn't skip any of the gradations. I, with fear and trembling, moved very slowly toward inclusion. And you know what? It took me, there was an 8 to 10 year in earnest process where I couldn't skip a step. It'd be a little disingenuous of me to take that 8 to 10 years to repent and to change my mind that had been wired one way. And the day after I ended that process, to start dunning everybody else to sign on the line exactly the way I had. God gives us, Revelation 12 said, a space to repent. And if repentance is change of mind, I'm so glad I had a space and not a point. And so I think, again, this is nuanced and it could be picked apart a million ways. I just think there's room here for there to be compassion toward the side that is still carrying a position that they believe. When my dad looks at me, he is not hateful and mean. He thinks I am costing myself and my children their soul. That is not hate. It's deep grief on his part because he truly believes those things.
Hmm.
And so I just think we have to be reminded of that.
Yeah. So good. Every time I finish up these calls, I wish we had longer, but you know, it's just how it goes. So thank you. Thank you so much, Stan. Thank you, Danny. Thank you for, um, you know, listening and leaning in and changing your minds and doing the work that you do, and for just for, you know, the hope that you represent for us. And thanks for the conversation tonight. It was so, so good. All of you, thank you for joining us.